The night my phone lit up with an unknown number, flashing insistently in the dark quiet of my apartment. I had already learned how to live without the closure I once craved, without the lingering questions, so the reflex to ignore it was strong. That's why I almost ignored the call. Almost. Then I heard her voice, familiar, cutting through the 7 months of silence I had meticulously constructed, say, "Let me in. I'm outside." There was no softening preamble, no hesitant hello, and certainly no attempt at an apology. Just pure, unadulterated entitlement, acting as if the entire tumultuous history of the last 7 months had been erased, or perhaps, was simply beneath her consideration. Before we go any further, if you've ever had someone important disappear from your orbit and then reappear demanding re-entry like nothing changed, hit subscribe, tap like, and tell me in the comments whether you believe people really change or if they just run out of options. The sudden demand had me moving across the refinished hardwood floor. I stood by the window and looked down at the front porch, the newly installed carriage lamp casting a cool, architectural light. There she was, Laura, arms folded tight across her chest, chin lifted slightly, still wearing confidence like a custom-fitted piece of battle armor. She looked exactly like someone who expected the door to swing open simply because she willed it. 7 months earlier, with that same rigid confidence, she'd walked out on our marriage without a backward glance. There was no discussion of counseling, no moment of hesitation, just a clinical, devastating speech about how I was safe, predictable, and fundamentally limited. She needed more than that, more excitement, more danger, more sky. She even framed it poetically, claiming I was merely the ground she stood on while she learned how to fly. I didn't open the door because she commanded it. I opened it because a cold, clinical curiosity had taken root. I wanted to see if that woman, the one who needed more sky, still existed, or if reality had finally closed the distance and caught up to her. She didn't wait for an invitation, or even a beat of silence for me to process her presence. She brushed past me the moment the latch released, moving with the practiced ease of someone who still held a key. That was mistake number 1. The automatic assumption of possession. "You can't just show up like this," I said, pushing the door shut with a deliberate, echoing thud. "We need to talk," she replied, her gaze already sweeping the living room, taking inventory. She stopped short, the practiced ease momentarily gone. The house had changed fundamentally. Where her style had once introduced vibrant, often cluttered, bohemian touches, there was now new, deliberate furniture, different colors, muted grays and deep blues, and an emphasis on clean lines and open space. Every superficial trace of her taste was gone, eliminated, sterilized. I'd stripped the place down to the bare architectural bones a month after she left and rebuilt it piece by calculated piece. Not to erase her, but definitively, irrevocably to remember myself, who I was without her constant editorializing. "You redecorated," she said, the tone implying I'd committed an inexplicable felony. "Turns out I have perfectly decent taste when I'm not being corrected every 5 minutes," I retorted, the sarcasm sharp and effortless. She ignored that, choosing instead to settle herself on the leather sofa. My sofa, the one she'd never seen before, a statement piece that filled the space she had once occupied. I remained standing, asserting my dominance over the vertical plane. "I know things ended badly," she said carefully, adopting a somber, reasonable cadence. "Badly," I repeated, letting out a short, humorless laugh that tasted like dust. "You told me I was boring. You told me you felt trapped. You told me you needed someone who lived on the edge, someone who wasn't afraid of real risk." She shifted uncomfortably on the pristine leather. "I was emotional," she claimed. "People say things they don't mean when they're emotional." "No," I replied, my voice measured. "You said exactly what you meant, Laura. You articulated your precise needs, and I respected them." She looked up at me then, attempting to reclaim the narrative. "You don't understand what I went through after I left. And you don't understand something important right now," I cut in, stepping slightly toward the entryway. "This isn't your house anymore." She frowned, confusion replacing the careful composure. "What do you mean?" I told her to check the deed, though I knew she wouldn't have the documentation with her. Her name had been legally removed and filed the day after she left. A clinical response to an emotional abandonment. Same with the joint accounts, the insurance policies, everything that tied our futures together. Her face drained of color, going slack and pale. "You can't do that without telling me," she whispered, the panic finally breaching her armor. "I sent all the signed, certified paperwork to your mother's permanent address 7 months ago. You never responded to the final notice." She stood up slowly, her body language stiff and recalculating, like a complex algorithm encountering a hard error. Whatever carefully rehearsed plan she'd choreographed for this evening was unraveling fast, exposing the fragile motivation beneath. "I came here to explain what happened with Derek," she announced, finally pivoting to the core subject. Of course she did. Derek, the man who rode terrifying motorcycles, who bungee jumped off questionable infrastructure, and who somehow made a precarious living turning human danger into televised applause. The man who was everything I wasn't supposed to be, embodying the excitement she craved. "I saw the news," I said, preempting her explanation. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Pool accident," I added, feeling neither satisfaction nor regret, just detachment. "Big party, bad outcome, spinal injury." "It's more complicated than that," she insisted, stepping closer, attempting intimacy. "I'm sure it is," I replied, holding my ground. "But here's the thing, Laura. I genuinely don't care about the complications." She stepped closer again, desperation now cracking the polished surface of her facade. "He can't work anymore," she said, her voice dropping, almost pleading. "The medical bills are absolutely overwhelming." I thought maybe, "You thought you could come back and use me as a financial defibrillator?" I finished the sentence for her, flatly. A heavy silence followed, thick with the unsaid accusation. "You really think I'm that pathetic?" she finally managed. "I think you're a good man," she said softly, shifting tactics again. "You keep your word. You fulfill obligations." I laughed, a short, involuntary bark of sound that surprised us both. "We made vows," I said, shaking my head. "Don't quote promises you shattered into dust. You don't get to burn the entire bridge down to the waterline and then ask me to carry you across the river on my shoulders." Her voice shifted again, becoming sweeter, lower, reminiscent of the girl I once fell in love with. "I've changed," she murmured. "What exactly changed, Laura?" I asked, cutting to the quick. "Your fundamental values or your financial balance sheet?" That landed squarely. She had no answer ready, just stood there, the realization dawning that this visit was failing precisely because I was no longer the man she remembered, or the man she expected me to be. "I'm not asking to fix us," she conceded, dropping her eyes. "I'm asking for help." "No," I said, just that one word. It was clear, solid, and utterly non-negotiable. She snatched her expensive purse off the floor. Anger, a much easier emotion to access than fear, replaced the tentative desperation. "You're really going to be this cold?" she challenged, her voice rising. "I'm being clear," I replied calmly. "There's a vital difference between those two states." She paused at the door, her hand hovering over the knob. "You'll regret this," she promised, the last vestiges of sweetness gone. "I regret wasting 3 years of my life on someone who saw me as an easily accessible backup plan," I countered. "This, I won't regret." She left without another word, slamming the front door with a satisfying, theatrical flourish. I locked the deadbolt, went back to my desk, and immediately returned to the report I had been typing, settling back into my work routine as if the last 10 minutes had never happened. 7 months ago, her leaving had shattered me, rendering me non-functional. Tonight, her calculated return didn't even manage to slow my resting pulse. And that, I knew, was the defining measure of how profoundly something within me had finally changed. 2 days passed before she tried again. I know it was exactly 2 days because the quiet felt measured, almost oppressive, like the precise, held pause between a flash of lightning and the inevitable crack of thunder. When my phone rang, it was the same unknown number. I didn't answer. I watched the screen glow and vibrate itself into silence. Then I minimized the distraction and kept typing, finishing a complex financial report I'd promised myself I wouldn't rush anymore. A voicemail followed moments later. Her voice was calmer this time, stripped of the initial demand, but sounding unervingly practiced. The tone of someone carefully reciting a defense. "We didn't finish our conversation," she claimed. "There are things you don't know. Things that explain everything." I deleted it immediately, without ever listening to the recording twice. Whatever explanation she possessed needed to have been delivered before she walked out on our life. Not after the grim consequences of her choices showed up at her doorstep, wearing her shoes. Saturday morning arrived with clear, high skies and the kind of profound stillness I had fought hard to appreciate. I was sitting on the back patio with a heavy ceramic mug of coffee, watching the steam curl lazily into the crisp air, when the doorbell began to ring. Not once, not twice, but persistent, calculatedly insistent. I gave her credit for that sheer tenacity. When I finally opened the door, she looked subtly different. The expensive polish had cracked, exposing the stress underneath. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, without the usual effort she put into her appearance. Her eyes were shadowed, genuinely tired in a way that neither sleep nor expensive cosmetics could fix. "5 minutes," she said, skipping any pretense of social formality. "That's all I'm asking for." I almost closed the door on her face. What stopped me was that cold knot of curiosity. I wanted to hear exactly how she intended to rewrite our shared reality this time. "You can stand right there," I said, indicating the threshold. 5 minutes. Don't step inside. Don't move." She took a deep, visible breath like a person bracing themselves for a physical impact. "The accident wasn't just bad luck," she started, her voice tight. "I need you to understand what actually happened." I told her I had already read the articles. A party, a swimming pool, misjudged depth, severe spinal injury. "That's the headline summary," she said, shaking her head. "That's not the truth of the situation." She hesitated for a long, agonizing moment, then pushed the words out. I encouraged him. That got my full attention. The cynical detachment briefly faltered. She went on to explain the scene. The rented mansion, the frantic crowd, the pervasive atmosphere of alcohol and adrenaline. She described Derek doing what he always did, performing for the collective attention, feeding the frenzy. Someone had made a joke about jumping from the roof into the pool. Everyone laughed, she recalled, except Derek, who had paused and genuinely considered it. I asked the question I already knew the answer to, just to hear her say it. "You told him not to," I prompted. She didn't answer immediately. A profound, charged silence filled the space between us. "You told him to do it," I restated, not as a question but a fact I'd processed. She nodded once, a gesture so minimal it barely moved her chin. She claimed she didn't force him, just pushed the idea. She filmed the setup. She said something to him about being truly fearless in front of the assembled crowd. She called it content. It wasn't supposed to go wrong, she insisted, sounding genuinely panicked by the unpredictability. She said he'd successfully done similar dangerous stunts dozens of times before. I asked why no one had bothered to check the pool depth, a basic detail of human safety. She looked away, focusing on the trim of the doorframe. The video, she whispered, showed everything. The cheering, the actual jump, the impact. Lawyers told her it wasn't illegal. "Technically," I replied, the word feeling cold on my tongue. "Technically, you didn't break a law. But morally, you destroyed a life for applause and a moment of adrenaline-fueled performance." She told me he was now paralyzed, confirming the extent of the injury. She detailed how sponsors had instantly vanished, how the parasitic friends had disappeared, and how the crushing medical bills stacked up around her like suffocating walls. She said caring for him was relentless. The endless specialized appointments, the constant equipment maintenance, the daily routines that never, ever ended. "It's suffocating," she admitted, wiping at her tired eyes. I recognized the word immediately. She had used that exact term 7 months ago to describe our marriage. Stable, predictable, suffocating. The difference between the two situations was stark and brutally simple. I had been consistent and safe. Derek was broken and demanding. "I know I hurt you," she said, the tears starting to feel rehearsed. "I don't deserve your help. I just don't have anywhere else left to go. I told her she was fundamentally wrong. She wasn't alone. She still had the man she chose, the excitement she chased. He's not the same, she said, the final, pathetic confession. And there it was. The moment her chosen excitement failed, she looked immediately for reliable shelter. She had replaced loyalty with a temporary thrill. I told her to go back to him. Be the partner she had promised to be, the one she filmed the content with. Handle what you started, I instructed. Anger, sharp and quick, flashed in her eyes. You're enjoying this, she accused, watching me struggle. I shook my head slowly, genuinely disagreeing. I'm not enjoying anything, Laura. I'm refusing to rescue you from the consequences of the problems you actively created. There's a fundamental difference. She asked if this meant I was really going to leave her with absolutely nothing. You did that to yourself, I pointed out. I am simply not your safety net, especially not after I was discarded. She turned and walked away without another word. I went back to my coffee mug. The coffee had gone cold and oily, but I didn't care. The truth had settled in quietly, conclusively. She hadn't come back because she missed me. She came back because she needed a solution, a reliable, predictable solution, and I was done being anyone's utility. A week of absolute silence followed, the kind that feels intensely artificial, like someone holding their breath underwater. I didn't mistake it for acceptance. I knew Laura well enough to recognize retreat as a temporary strategic maneuver. Sure enough, on a subsequent Thursday evening, the sharp knock came again. Not the soft chime of the doorbell this time. Knuckles sharp, insistent, like she was trying to break through more than just the solid wood. When I opened the door, she was holding a heavy folder tight against her chest, the white knuckles betraying the enforced calm she was attempting to project. You need to look at this, she said, her voice tight. I'm not here to argue. She tried the habitual move of stepping past me into the warm entryway. I blocked the doorway with my shoulder. You are absolutely not coming in, I said. Whatever you want to show me, you can present it right there. She exhaled a ragged breath, then snapped the folder open and flipped the pages toward me. They contained a dense collection. Pages of Derek's invoices, insurance rejection statements, physical therapy schedules, and rows of six-figure numbers dense enough to make anyone dizzy. I didn't take them. I didn't need to touch them. I'd lived long enough to immediately recognize desperation dressed up as meticulous documentation. This is my reality, she insisted. Every single day, and it's deteriorating rapidly. That's unfortunate, I said, nodding once clinically. But it is not, by any stretch of the imagination, my problem. Her eyes sharpened, detecting the absolute barrier I had erected. It could be, she replied, pushing the envelope. If you would just listen. She straightened her shoulders, adopting a business posture. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a partnership. I couldn't help the small, bitter sound that escaped me. A short, utterly humorless laugh that held no joy. A partnership? I asked, letting the ridiculousness hang in the air. What precisely would we be partnering on? She didn't flinch. Let me move back in temporarily. Just until I get back on my feet financially. I'll contribute. Split expenses. You would barely notice I'm here. The sheer audacity and confidence of the suggestion almost impressed me. You're serious? I asked, genuinely confounded. Completely, she replied. Think about it logically. You have space. I desperately need space. We coexist. No emotional expectations whatsoever. I stared at her like she had just addressed me in a dead language. Roommates, I said slowly, testing the word. With my ex-wife who publicly abandoned me for a thrill seeker and is now trying to escape the predictable consequences of what she helped engineer. She winced painfully. That's a harsh way to phrase it. It's an accurate one, I countered. And the answer remains no. Her voice tightened with emerging panic. I'm trying to find a job. No one will give me a reference after I left suddenly. Apartments require deposits I don't have access to. You are my only viable option. No, I corrected her. I am your easiest option. There is a world of difference between those two states. She snapped the folder shut violently. The last trace of measured softness vanished, replaced by cold steel. Fine, she said, her tone suddenly aggressive. Let's talk about what I am legally entitled to. We were married 3 years. We are in a community property state. I could fight for half of what you earned during that time. You could try, I replied calmly. You would lose. She smiled then, a small, patronizing gesture, certain she had caught me bluffing. You don't know that. I do, I said, leaning closer so she understood the certainty in my voice. I had Michael Reynolds, my attorney, file the separation papers the week you left. You had 30 days to contest or respond. You didn't. They are final, legally binding documents. The color drained from her face a second time, leaving a sickly pallor. You're lying. Check with any competent attorney, I said. You legally signed away your claims by not contesting the terms within the allotted time frame. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, heavy with realization. That's why you were so calm. This entire time. I nodded once. The day you walked out the door, I called Michael Reynolds. He's thorough. She took a decisive step back from the doorway, appearing profoundly shaken. I didn't think you were capable of something so cold, she murmured. I met her stare, unblinking. I learned from watching you, Laura, I said. You were always 3 steps ahead when it directly benefited you. I just applied the same principle to protecting myself. She asked if I was really going to let her end up with nothing, destitute. I told her she still had options, just not comfortable ones. Family, reliable friends, and critically, the man she chose. She admitted quietly that her bridges were thoroughly burnt. Her family wanted nothing to do with her. Old friends had vanished, and Derek's long, suffering family barely tolerated her. Sounds like you lit every single match yourself, I observed simply. She asked if she deserved to lose everything. You didn't lose it, I replied, making the distinction clear. You threw it away. She tried bargaining next. Cooking, cleaning, helping around the house, acting as a dutiful assistant. I told her I already had systems and contractors that worked perfectly fine without emotional baggage. Then what do you want? She finally asked, her composure breaking into genuine, raw frustration. I didn't hesitate for a second. I want you to leave, I said, and stop coming back here trying to negotiate your way into a life you actively chose to abandon. She accused me of being cruel. I am being honest, I corrected her. Honest would have been admitting you needed me before your entire life collapsed. This, I said, indicating her desperate stance, is merely regret poorly disguised as personal growth. She stared at me for a long, heavy moment, then slowly shook her head, the finality sinking in. I thought there was still someone in there who cared, she said. There is, I countered. I just care about myself more than I care about the emotional labor of rescuing you. That's a lesson you taught me exceptionally well. She walked stiffly to her car without another word. As she drove off, I noticed it wasn't the reliable German sedan she used to own. This car was older, smaller, clearly used. Reality was catching up to her, piece by measurable piece. I closed the door and went back inside, feeling something profound settle in my chest. It wasn't triumph, and it wasn't anger. It was pure, unadulterated clarity. An hour after she drove away, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number, 1 line of text. This isn't over. I blocked the number without responding and immediately made a note to call Michael Reynolds, the attorney, first thing in the morning. Experience had taught me that silence isn't a sign of weakness. It's often preparation for the next round. Michael answered on the second ring the next day, sounding predictably calm. Let me guess, he said immediately. She showed up. I told him everything. The documentation folder, the community property threat, the sudden interest in legal entitlement. He confirmed what I already knew. The separation settlement was ironclad. She had 0 legal standing. Still, he told me to meticulously document every single interaction. Dates, times, messages, her behavior. Patterns matter profoundly when people get desperate. That word, desperate, stayed with me, resonating. Desperation has a specific, violent momentum, and it didn't take long for her to prove it. That afternoon, I was working from home when I noticed movement on the security monitor I had installed months earlier. Not out of fear, but simple, preemptive clarity. She was standing at the edge of the driveway, rigid, staring at the house like it owed her compensation. This time, I didn't wait for her to approach or knock. I stepped outside and closed the door firmly behind me. "We need to establish boundaries," I said before she could even formulate a greeting. "I just want to talk," she replied quickly. "We can walk." I nodded once and started walking toward the street. She fell into step beside me, glancing around like she was cataloging a physical list of profound losses. "You've done a lot with the place," she observed, sounding almost envious. "It suits you." I didn't slow my pace. Turns out when no one constantly criticizes your choices, you start making substantially better ones. She sighed, a long, manufactured sound of patient suffering. "I never actually said you were boring. You said predictable, stable, and safe," I countered, stopping abruptly and turning to face her. "Those were delivered as the most searing insults possible, coming from you." She didn't attempt to argue that point. Instead, she tried a new tactic. Honesty or something remarkably close to it. "I didn't leave because I stopped caring about you," she confessed. "I left because I felt fundamentally trapped, like my whole identity was just being defined as your wife." I studied her face, looking for sincerity. "And did you figure out who you are, Laura?" I asked. She hesitated, the truth catching in her throat. "I figured out that freedom isn't much help when you're actively drowning." I shook my head, rejecting the framing of the statement. "That's not insight," I replied. "That's simply regret." She stopped walking entirely. "Why are you being so cold?" Her voice finally cracked, betraying a flicker of genuine vulnerability. "You used to be inherently kind." I looked at her, really looked, past the exhaustion and the fear. "I am kind," I said. "I'm just not sacrificing my hard-won peace anymore to make you feel better about the choices you inflicted on others." She asked if I was really going to stand by and watch her fall apart completely. "I'm going to stand by and watch you take accountability," I replied. "That is not cruelty. That is accountability." She said she had hoped I would still be the person she remembered. I insisted. "I'm just no longer available to be used for emotional or financial safety." She accused me of harboring anger. I corrected her again, definitively. "Anger takes massive amounts of emotional energy," I said. "I don't have that kind of emotional investment in you anymore." We reached the end of the driveway pavement. She tried one last, desperate angle, invoking residual feelings. She claimed she still had them. I laughed again, not to be malicious, but because it was so utterly transparent. "You're confusing comfort with connection," I said. "They are not the same thing." She rolled down her window just before driving off, staring straight ahead. "I'm not giving up," she stated flatly. "That's your choice," I agreed, nodding. "But understand this, showing up here repeatedly will not change the answer." That evening, another voicemail arrived. She had learned about a potential new wave of legal trouble tied to the accident. She was asking for my advice, a recommendation for a specific type of lawyer. I deleted it instantly. Her cascading problems were profoundly no longer mine to solve. Weeks passed, marked only by the quiet rhythm of my routine. Then Michael called with news that only confirmed what I already sensed. External pressure on Laura was building, serious pressure from civil suits and insurers. I listened to the grim details, thanked him professionally, and hung up without a single ripple of emotion. Later that night, sitting on the back patio, the very place where this final cycle of confrontation had begun, I realized something critical. She wasn't orbiting me because of love or even nostalgia. She was orbiting because gravity pulls hardest when everything else has fallen away. And for the first time in our history, I wasn't being dragged into her gravitational field. The next time she came, she didn't come alone. That should have been my first clear clue that things had escalated to a new level of desperation. I opened the door to find Laura standing beside a woman I'd never encountered before. Mid-50s, sharp tailored jacket, a professional smile that didn't quite reach her assessing eyes. "This is Karen Miller," Laura said quickly, anticipating my question. "She's a professional mediator. I thought having a neutral third party might help us navigate this." I didn't step aside, I didn't offer a hand, and I didn't agree to the premise. "I didn't agree to mediation," I stated clearly. You are both currently standing on my private property without express permission. Karen tried to interject something professionally phrased about facilitating understanding, but I cut the sentence short. There is nothing to facilitate. The answer is and will remain no. Laura's composure cracked, revealing the raw fear underneath the new strategy. I'm facing a lawsuit that could absolutely ruin me, she pleaded. I just need help getting through this specific crisis. I looked at her, searching myself for the expected shift, the flicker of guilt or the old protective pull. I felt nothing, only a profound distance. You ruined yourself, I said calmly. I didn't push you toward any of this recklessness. Karen again suggested compromise. I shut that down just as decisively. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a refusal, carefully disguised as a discussion. When Laura finally accused me of abandoning her after 3 years of sacred marriage, I simply reminded her that those years ended the very instant she walked out the door and abandoned the entire life we had built. Choices are not simply mistakes when they are deliberate philosophical decisions. She tried one last, pathetic tactic, offering contracts, stringent repayment plans, promises of future stability and gratitude. The math didn't work, and neither did the desperate emotion behind the offer. When they finally left, defeated, I called Michael immediately. He wasn't surprised. Pressure makes people profoundly reckless, he noted. A week later, he called again with a significant update. The civil suit tied to the accident had officially been filed. The numbers involved were large enough to feel entirely unreal. Massive liability, devastating damages, the kind of consequences that don't negotiate or forgive. I listened, thanked him, and went back to my quiet evening routine like it was any other day. She tried contacting me once more after that. A final message slipped through via a new burner number before I blocked it permanently. Asterisk, I hope you're happy. I stared at the single line for a moment, then typed back the precise truth. I hadn't achieved exactly what I'd wanted. I had wanted a partner who valued the secure foundation we built. What I got instead was absolute clarity and the ability to move forward without the crushing weight of guilt. I blocked the number and didn't look back. Time did what time always does when you stop fighting it. It moved on. Weeks passed, then months. I ran into Sarah Collins, a former colleague from an old corporate project, at a coffee shop one afternoon. She immediately commented that I looked significantly lighter, less stressed. She was right. We talked easily, without urgency, without any hint of chaos lurking beneath the surface. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was constantly bracing myself for the next inevitable impact. Not long after that meeting, I noticed Laura's car circling the block on my security feed. Never stopping, never approaching the house, just orbiting the perimeter, a satellite that had lost its orbit. I called Michael again. The restraining order was granted within days. 500 feet minimum distance. No contact. Silence. Finally, the boundaries I had established were enforced by the rule of law, if not by her choice. About a year passed. Life settled into something sustainable, something that felt real. Work, the silence of the new life was interrupted not by alarm, but by cold indifference. My phone blinked to life, displaying a number I had never saved, never wanted to save. 7 months of careful restructuring had taught me how to live without the closure I once craved. I had learned how to breathe in the absence of answers. That's why I was prepared to let it die in my hand. Another digital ghost. But I didn't. I slid the screen open, and then I heard her voice. Let me in. I'm outside. No prelude, no hesitant hello. Certainly no whisper of apology. Just the blunt, unearned authority of someone who still held the key to a door that had been permanently sealed. It was pure entitlement, a toxic self-assurance that behaved as if the last 7 months of silence and destruction had simply evaporated. Before we plunge further into this particular moment of reckoning, if you've ever had a person vanish from your life only to reappear, demanding their old spot back like nothing changed, hit that subscribe button, tap the like, and drop a comment below. Tell me honestly, do people truly undergo fundamental change, or do they just run out of better options? Standing by the window, I peered down onto the newly painted front porch. There she was, Laura, arms crossed tight over her chest, chin angled upward, the classic posture of someone expecting immediate surrender. She was still wrapped in that familiar confidence, the one she wore like custom-fitted armor. She looked precisely like the kind of person who assumed a door would swing open just because she commanded it. 7 months earlier, she had executed her departure from our marriage without a single backward glance. No attempts at couples counseling, no hesitant pause at the threshold, just a polished, brutal speech about my perceived limitations. I was safe, I was predictable, and she needed more. More vibrancy, more exhilaration, more risk, more sky. I was merely the dependable, solid ground she stood on while she figured out how to fly. I didn't open the door because her demand held any weight. I opened it because I desperately needed to confirm whether that woman, the one who believed the world operated on her terms, still existed, or if the cold hammer of reality had finally shattered her delusion. She didn't wait for a formal invitation. She swept past me, the ghost of familiarity in her movements, as if she were simply returning from the grocery store. That was her first, crucial miscalculation. You can't just show up like this, I stated, the words flat and even. We need to talk, she countered, already scanning the living room with proprietary interest. She stopped dead. The house had undergone a silent, architectural amputation. New, stark furniture replaced the plush, comfortable pieces. The walls were painted in cool, sophisticated neutrals. Every single trace of her loud, chaotic taste had been systematically purged. A month after she left, I had hired a crew and stripped the place down to the bones, meticulously rebuilding it piece by piece. Not to erase her memory, but to remember myself. You redecorated, she accused, the tone implying I had committed a serious domestic felony. As it turns out, I replied, a hint of dry humor surfacing, I have decent taste when I'm not being corrected every 5 minutes. She ignored the remark with practiced ease and settled onto the sofa. My new sofa, the one she'd never touched. I remained standing, maintaining a necessary physical distance. I know things ended badly, she began, her voice modulated and careful. Badly. I let out a short, sharp burst of laughter, a sound devoid of joy. Badly? You informed me I was an architectural representation of boredom. You confessed to feeling trapped. You articulated a profound need for someone who lived perpetually on the edge. She shifted uncomfortably on the pristine upholstery. I was emotional, she said, pulling out the tired defense. People often say things they don't truly mean. No, I replied, letting the word hang heavy between us. You articulated exactly what you meant. She finally looked up, meeting my eyes with defensive intensity. You don't understand what I had to endure after I left. And you don't grasp one crucial fact, I interrupted, cutting her off cleanly. This isn't your house anymore. A deep frown creased her forehead. What are you talking about? I told her to look up the property records. Her name had been formally excised from the deed the day following her departure. The same comprehensive approach had been applied to all joint accounts, insurance policies, and every shared asset. The color visibly drained from her face, leaving her features paper white. You can't do that without notifying me, she gasped. I sent the paperwork and all necessary filings to your mother's address weeks ago. I countered. You never bothered to respond. She stood up slowly, her mind visibly racing, recalculating the geometry of her unexpected failure. Whatever intricate, rehearsed plea she had formulated was unraveling at high speed. I came here to explain what happened with Derek, she announced. Of course she did. Derek, the adrenaline junkie who rode vintage motorcycles, whose bio included cliff jumping, and who had mastered the art of turning reckless danger into lucrative applause. The man who represented everything I was specifically defined against. I saw the news, I said simply. Her jaw visibly tightened. Pool accident, I added, emphasizing the cold facts. Big party, profoundly bad outcome. It's far more complicated than that, she insisted. I'm sure it is, I replied, leaning into the formality of the conversation. But here's the thing, Laura. I genuinely don't care. She stepped closer, and the polished veneer finally cracked, revealing raw desperation. He can't work anymore, she whispered urgently. The medical bills are overwhelming. I thought maybe. You thought you could simply return? I completed the thought she couldn't articulate. Silence stretched, heavy and undeniable. You truly believe I'm that pathetic? I think you are fundamentally a good man, she said, pivoting sharply, softening her tone. You always kept your word. We made vows, I laughed. A genuine, short, bitter laugh that escaped before I could stop it. Do not quote promises that you deliberately shredded, I warned. You don't get to stand on the shore after you've burned the bridge and then ask me to carry you across the river. Her voice shifted, becoming cloyingly sweet now. A desperate register I hadn't heard in years. I've changed. What exactly changed? I asked, my gaze clinical. Your moral values or your bank balance? That question landed with the force of a physical blow. She had no immediate answer, standing frozen as the full realization hit her. This scenario was veering wildly off her carefully constructed script. I'm not asking you to fix us, she pleaded. I'm asking for help. No, I said. Just one word. Clear. Solid. Unnegotiable. She snatched her designer purse from the couch, anger swiftly replacing fear. Are you really going to be this cold? I'm being clear, I replied, defining the crucial difference. She hesitated at the door, her back to me. You'll regret this. My only regret, I said, ensuring the words resonated clearly, was wasting 3 years of my life on someone who viewed me as nothing more than a contingency plan. This, I will not regret. She left without another sound. I locked the deadbolt, walked back to my desk, and resumed the architectural blueprints I was working on, settling back into my quiet routine as if the disturbance had never occurred. 7 months ago, her leaving had completely shattered the foundation of my existence. Tonight, her chaotic return hadn't even nudged my resting heart rate. That profound, silent non-reaction was the only proof I needed that something fundamental had finally changed within me. 2 days of artificial quiet passed. A silence that felt calibrated, like the specific, measured interval between a flash of lightning and the inevitable thunder. When my phone chimed, the same unknown number displayed. I ignored it completely, letting it buzz itself into oblivion, dedicating my focus to a complex report I had promised myself I wouldn't rush through anymore. A voicemail followed shortly after. Her voice was noticeably steadier this time, the emotion deliberately practiced. We didn't finish our conversation. There are things you don't know, things that fully explain everything. I deleted the recording without bothering to listen to it a second time. Whatever illuminating explanation she possessed needed to have been delivered before she voluntarily walked out, not after the consequences arrived wearing her discarded shoes. Saturday morning dawned with an immaculate, clear sky and a profound stillness I had fought hard to cultivate and appreciate. I was settled on the back patio with a heavy ceramic mug of coffee, watching the steam twist lazily into the crisp air, when the doorbell began to insist. Not a polite ring, but a persistent, relentless hammering. I had to give her credit for sheer tenacity. When I opened the door, she looked markedly different. The expensive polish was starting to visibly crack. Her hair was hastily pulled back, suggesting zero concern for appearance. Her eyes held the deep, bruised exhaustion that a mere night's sleep cannot remedy. 5 minutes, she said, her voice raspy. That's all I'm asking for. I almost slammed the door shut. Pure, cold curiosity stopped my hand. I wanted to witness exactly how she intended to attempt the total rewriting of reality. You can stand right there, I instructed, planting my feet firmly in the doorway. 5 minutes. Do not cross the threshold. She took a huge, visible breath, bracing herself as if for a physical impact. The accident wasn't just bad luck, she began. I need you to understand what actually happened. I reiterated that I had read the news coverage, high-profile party, pool misjudged depth, spinal injury. That's the simplified headline, she scoffed. That's not the agonizing truth. She paused. Then the dam finally broke. I encouraged him. That single admission seized my complete attention. She launched into the narrative. The wild party, the ostentatious rented mansion, the frenetic crowd, the free-flowing alcohol. She described Derek operating in his natural habitat, performing, drawing energy from the hungry attention. Someone in the back had jokingly suggested he jump from the rooftop directly into the illuminated pool. Everyone laughed, but Derek paused. He genuinely considered it. I posed the question, already knowing the devastating answer. You told him not to. She didn't respond. The silence between us became thick and heavy. You told him to do it, I stated flatly. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She insisted she hadn't forced him, merely pushed the idea. She had filmed the entire thing. She said something about it being a necessary display of fearlessness in front of his audience. Content, she called it. It wasn't supposed to fail, she claimed, repeating that he had successfully executed similar stunts before. I asked why no one had bothered to verify the pool depth beforehand. She looked away, focusing on the newly painted mailbox. The video, she finally admitted, showed everything. The cheering, the jump, the sickening sound of the impact. The lawyers had assured her it wasn't legally actionable. Technically, she stressed. Technically, I echoed, my voice cold, but morally, you effectively destroyed a human life for the sake of cheap applause and online validation. She informed me he was paralyzed, that his lucrative sponsorships had vanished instantly, that his fair-weather friends had evaporated, and that the relentless medical bills were stacking up around them like insurmountable prison walls. She described the endless cycle of care, the constant appointments, the specialized equipment, the soul-crushing routine that had no end date. It's suffocating, she whispered, tears finally tracing tracks down her cheeks. I recognized the word instantly. She had used that precise adjective to describe our marriage. Stable, predictable, suffocating. The difference was stark and painful. I had merely been consistent. Derek was broken. She quickly wiped at her eyes, but even the tears felt suspiciously practiced. I know I hurt you, she murmured. I don't deserve your help. I just don't have anywhere else left to go. I reminded her that she wasn't truly alone. She still had the man she had consciously chosen over everything we had built. He's not the same, she snapped, the mask slipping completely. And there it was. She had swapped loyalty for excitement. Now that excitement had failed catastrophically, she was searching for the most convenient shelter. I told her to return to him. Be the partner you promised to be. Handle the precise consequences you helped initiate. Anger flashed across her face, hot and immediate. You're actually enjoying this, she accused, watching my composure. I shook my head slowly. I am not rescuing you from the massive problems you single-handedly created. There is a fundamental difference. She asked if this meant I was truly going to leave her with absolutely nothing. I clarified that she had accomplished that task all by herself. I was simply no longer acting as her emergency safety net. She spun on her heel and walked away, this time without uttering another single word. I returned to my coffee. It was stone cold, but the temperature didn't matter. The truth had quietly settled deep inside me. She didn't return because she missed me. She returned because she desperately needed a solution. And I was definitively finished being anyone's easy solution. A full week of unsettling silence followed. The kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like someone forcefully holding their breath underwater. I did not mistake it for genuine acceptance. I knew Laura too intimately to confuse a tactical retreat with a true surrender. Sure enough, on a routine Thursday evening, the knock came again. Not the polite, distant ring of the doorbell, but sharp, insistent knuckles against the wood, as if she were intent on shattering more than just the door panel. When I opened it, she was holding a thick folder tightly against her chest. Her knuckles were white, betraying the fragile composure she was attempting to project. You need to look at this, she commanded. I'm not here to argue. She attempted to step past me into the foyer. I blocked the doorway with my shoulder. You are not coming in, I stated firmly. Whatever you want to show me, you can present it right there. She let out a frustrated sigh, then snapped open the folder and aggressively flipped it toward me. Pages upon pages. Detailed invoices, incomprehensible insurance statements, therapy schedules, and rows of dense, dizzying numbers. I didn't reach for them. I didn't need to. I had lived long enough to immediately recognize sheer desperation meticulously disguised as professional documentation. "This is my reality," she insisted. "Every single day. And it's deteriorating rapidly." I nodded once, curtly. "That," I replied, "is truly unfortunate. But it is not, and will never be, my problem." Her eyes narrowed perceptibly. "It could be," she countered, "if you would just listen." She squared her shoulders, adopting a businesslike posture. "I am not asking for charity. I am proposing a partnership." I couldn't suppress the sound that escaped. A short, humorless, involuntary laugh. "A partnership?" I asked slowly. "And exactly what would we be partnering on?" She didn't flinch. "Let me move back in temporarily. Just until I can get financially stable again. I will contribute. We'll split the expenses. You would barely notice I was here." The audacious confidence of the suggestion nearly impressed me. "Nearly. You are completely serious?" I asked. "Entirely," she replied. "Think about it logically. You have ample space. I desperately require space. We could simply coexist. Zero expectations." I looked at her as if she had suddenly started speaking in an obscure dead language. "Roommates," I articulated slowly. "With my ex-wife who abandoned me for an extreme sports enthusiast and is now attempting to escape the profound consequences of her own co-authored disaster." She winced, reacting to the brutal summary. "That is a rather harsh way to phrase it." "It is an accurate one," I corrected her. "And the definitive answer is no." Her voice tightened with frustration. "I am actively trying to secure a job. No previous employer will provide a reference after I left so abruptly. Apartments require security deposits I simply don't possess. You are, quite literally, my only viable option." I shook my head slowly. "No," I countered. "I am your easiest option. There is a substantial difference." She snapped the folder shut, the remaining softness vanishing instantly. "Fine," she hissed. "Let's discuss what I am legally entitled to. We were married for 3 years. This is a community property state. I could fight for half of what you've earned since then." "You could certainly try," I replied calmly. "And you would lose." She smiled condescendingly, convinced she had caught me bluffing. "You don't know that for sure." "I do," I assured her. "I had my lawyer file the separation papers the very week you departed. You were allotted 30 days to respond. You failed to do so. They are final." The last vestiges of color drained from her cheeks. "You're lying." "Check with any competent attorney," I suggested. "You signed away your claims by legally failing to contest the terms." Her voice dropped to a near whisper, heavy with realization. "That's why you were so eerily calm." I nodded. "The day you walked out, I made one phone call to Michael Reynolds. He is exceedingly thorough." She took an involuntary step back, a look of shocked respect in her eyes. "I didn't think you were capable of something like that." "I learned the necessary skill set from observing you," I said. "You were always 3 steps ahead when it served your interests." I merely applied the same pragmatic principle. She asked if I was truly prepared to watch her end up destitute. I informed her that she still had options, just not the comfortable, ready-made ones she preferred. Family, old friends, the man she had chosen. She conceded that all those bridges had been thoroughly burned. Her family had disowned her, friends had disappeared, and Derek's family barely tolerated her presence. "It sounds," I concluded, "like you personally lit every single match." She asked if she truly deserved to lose everything. "You didn't lose it," I corrected her gently. "You violently threw it away." She attempted bargaining next. "I could cook, I could clean, I could help maintain the house." I told her I already had precise systems in place that functioned perfectly well without her interference. "Then what do you want from me?" she demanded, frustration turning raw. I didn't hesitate for a moment. "I want you to leave," I said. "And I want you to stop returning here, attempting to negotiate your way back into the life you chose to ruthlessly abandon." She accused me of being cruel. "Honest," I corrected her. "Honest would have been admitting you desperately needed me before everything spectacularly collapsed. This," I concluded, "is merely regret attempting to impersonate personal growth." She stared at me for a long, quiet moment, then slowly shook her head. I thought there was still a person inside there who cared. There is, I affirmed. I just care about myself more than I care about rescuing you. That, I concluded, was the last, most vital lesson you taught me. She walked quickly toward her car without another word. As she pulled away from the curb, I noted that it wasn't the pristine, expensive sedan she used to drive. It was older, visibly smaller, reality catching up to her, piece by incremental piece. I closed the door and went back inside, feeling a strange kind of peace settle within my core. Not triumph, not anger, but absolute clarity. An hour after she drove away, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number, one simple line of text. This isn't over. I blocked the number instantly without bothering to reply and made a mental note to call Michael Reynolds first thing in the morning. Experience had taught me that calculated silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a necessary form of preparation. Michael answered on the second ring the following day. "Let me guess," he said calmly, already aware. She showed up. I provided him with a detailed account of everything. The folder, the legal threats, the sudden proprietary interest in entitlement. He reaffirmed what I already knew. The separation documents were legally airtight. She had zero legal standing remaining. Still, he cautioned me to meticulously document every interaction, logging dates, exact times, and preserving all messages. Patterns matter, he advised. When people become desperate, that final word lingered in my mind. Desperate. Because desperation always possesses a dangerous momentum. And it didn't take long for her to prove it. That afternoon, I was working from my home office when I noticed movement on the security monitor feed. I had installed the comprehensive system months ago, not out of paranoia, but out of necessity for clarity. She was standing silently at the edge of the driveway, staring at the house like it owed her some monumental debt. This time, I didn't wait for the inevitable knock. I stepped outside and deliberately pulled the door shut behind me. "We need to establish permanent boundaries," I declared before she could start her rehearsed speech. "I just want to talk," she replied quickly, adopting a new, subdued tone. "We can walk." I nodded once and started down the driveway, establishing the distance. She followed, her gaze sweeping over the property as if cataloging her self-imposed losses. "You've done a lot with the place," she commented. "It suits you." I didn't slow my pace. It turns out that when no one constantly criticizes your choices, you naturally begin to make better ones. She sighed, defeated. I never actually used the word boring. I stopped and faced her. "You utilized predictable, stable, and safe. Coming from you, those were the deepest insults you could deliver." She didn't attempt to argue that point. Instead, she tried a new tactic, a fragile attempt at self-reflective honesty. "I didn't leave because I stopped caring for you," she claimed. "I left because I felt intensely trapped, like my entire identity was being reduced to nothing more than your wife." I scrutinized her face. "And did you manage to successfully figure out who you are?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering. "I figured out that freedom is absolutely useless when you're busy drowning in it." I shook my head, dismissing the shallow philosophy. "That is not profound insight. That is simply regret wearing a thin disguise. Why are you being so cold?" Her voice cracked dramatically this time. "You used to be kind." I looked at her, truly seeing the desperation pulling her down. "I am kind," I asserted. "I'm just no longer sacrificing my personal peace to make you feel subjectively better about your self-destructive choices." She asked if I was truly going to stand by and watch her whole life fall apart. "I'm going to watch you finally take accountability for your own actions," I replied. "That is not an act of cruelty. That is essential accountability." She said she had hoped I would still be the person she remembered. I told her I was, but that version of me was no longer available for her to use. She accused me of harboring residual anger. I corrected her again. "Anger requires emotional energy," I said. "I simply don't have that investment left in you anymore." We reached the end of the driveway. She asked what I truly desired. I told her the simple truth. Peace, predictability, mornings without tension. A life where I do not feel obligated to perpetually earn basic respect. She called that loneliness. I called it quiet. When I was with you, I said, I felt profoundly alone and consistently criticized. This separation is superior. She attempted one final angle, mentioning residual feelings, hinting at affection. I laughed, not to be cruel, but because the maneuver was so perfectly transparent. You are confusing comfort with genuine connection, I said. They are fundamentally different concepts. She rolled down her window before driving off. I'm not giving up. That is entirely your choice. But fully grasp this, showing up here will never, ever change the answer. That evening, another voicemail arrived. She had apparently discovered new legal trouble tied to the accident and was asking for my advice. Perhaps a recommendation for an attorney. I deleted it immediately. Her spiraling legal problems were not mine to solve, advise on, or worry about. Weeks passed. Then Michael Reynolds called with news that confirmed my growing suspicion. Pressure was escalating. Serious, professional pressure. I listened, thanked him for the update, and disconnected without any noticeable emotion. Later that night, sitting exactly where this entire painful cycle had begun, on my quiet back patio, I grasped something pivotal. She wasn't orbiting my life due to love or even nostalgia. She was orbiting because gravity pulls hardest when every other supporting element falls away. And for the first time in years, I was completely outside of her gravitational pull. The next time she made contact, she didn't arrive alone. That simple fact should have been my first, clear indication that things had escalated to a new level of desperation. I opened the door to find Laura standing next to a woman I had never encountered before. Mid-50s, impeccably tailored suit. A professional smile that didn't quite manage to reach the coldness in her eyes. This is Karen Miller, Laura quickly announced. She's a professional mediator. I thought bringing in a neutral third party might facilitate understanding. I didn't move aside. I never agreed to any form of mediation, I stated. You are both currently standing on my private property without express permission. Karen attempted to interject something about facilitating mutual understanding, but I cut her off mid-sentence. There's nothing to facilitate. The answer is an unambiguous no. Laura's carefully constructed composure shattered. I'm facing a massive lawsuit that could completely ruin me, she pleaded. I just need your help getting through this specific crisis. I looked at her and felt absolutely nothing shift inside me. No guilt, no residual attraction, just vast, protective distance. You ruined yourself, I said calmly. I didn't push you into any of this. Karen suggested the possibility of compromise. I shut that down just as efficiently. This was not a negotiation platform. This was rejection thinly disguised as a discussion. When Laura accused me of heartlessly abandoning her after 3 years of marriage, I gently reminded her that those years had definitively ended the precise moment she chose to walk out. Deliberate choices are not accidental mistakes. She tried one last, desperate tactic, offering formal contracts, rigid repayment plans, and solemn promises of future stability. The math simply didn't work out, and neither did the forced emotion behind the offer. When they finally turned to leave, I immediately called Michael. He was utterly unsurprised. Pressure, he observed, inevitably makes people reckless. A week later, he called again with an official update. The civil suit tied to Derek's accident had been formally filed. The damage figures were vast enough to feel completely abstract and unreal. Liability, punitive damages, consequences that simply do not negotiate. I listened, thanked him, and went back to my quiet evening as if it were any other ordinary day. She tried contacting me only once more after that. A short, plaintive message slipped through before I managed to block the new number. I hope you're happy. I stared at the text for a long moment, then typed back the absolute truth. I hadn't received what I wanted. I had wanted a genuine partner who valued the life we had carefully constructed. What I had achieved instead was absolute clarity and the capacity to move forward without the burden of guilt. I blocked the number and never looked back again. Time did what it always does when you stop fighting its flow. Weeks passed, then months. I ran into Sarah Collins, a former colleague from an old project, at a coffee shop one afternoon. She remarked that I looked significantly lighter. She was correct. We talked easily, slowly, without any sense of urgency or impending chaos. For the first time in several years, I no longer felt like I was bracing myself for an impact. Not long after, I began noticing Laura's car circulating the block on my security feed. Never stopping, just orbiting the perimeter. I called Michael Reynolds immediately. The restraining order was swiftly granted within days. 500 feet minimum distance. No contact. Silence, finally enforced by the full weight of the law, if not by her own choice. Approximately 1 year passed. Life had settled into something quietly sustainable. Work. I settled into a life that was productive and engaging. I stayed busy, yes, but the activity was fulfilling, not simply consuming or distracting. The evenings were the most telling change. They felt quiet, certainly, but this quietude was a profound contrast to the former emptiness. With Sarah, we didn't rush anything. We intentionally paced our connection, moving forward one careful step at a time. What we were building was sturdy, rooted deeply in mutual respect and understanding, a stark relief from the volatile, high-stakes adrenaline rush that had defined my previous relationship. As for my ex-wife, Laura, I made a conscious choice to never look back. I never checked her social media. I didn't ask mutual acquaintances about her whereabouts. I realized closure wasn't a destination achieved by external updates. It was an internal state of peace. It happened inside me the moment I signed the final divorce papers. I didn't need updates to feel closure. One soft, slow night, while we were sitting out on the back patio, Sarah, ever gentle and curious, broke the silence. She asked if I ever wondered what became of my ex-wife. I didn't even have to think about the answer. I simply shook my head, smiling faintly. I told Sarah that some people enter your story only to teach you a vital lesson. They are critical chapters, perhaps even difficult ones, but they are absolutely not the whole book. Laura had served her purpose. She had shown me, in excruciating detail, the exact compromises and disrespect I would never accept again in my life. That lesson was complete. It didn't require follow-ups or appendices. Any information I subsequently gathered, sifted through peripheral people who barely mattered to my life now, was simply background noise. That Laura had indeed moved out of state, attempting to initiate a new life somewhere else. That Derek, her son, had finally returned to the stability of his father's family, receiving the consistent care and support he desperately needed, entirely separate from her chaos. The perpetual noise stopped. The manipulative threats ended. The tumultuous chapter closed, not with a climactic final confrontation or histrionic drama, but simply with clear distance, ironclad boundaries, and the legal documentation that made those boundaries undeniable. When it was all truly over, I didn't feel victorious, triumphant, or even relieved in a celebratory way. What I felt was profound freedom. I was free from the crushing weight of being someone else's safety net or backup plan. Free from the corrosive, constant doubt about my own perception of reality. Free from the exhausting daily chore of trying to earn basic human respect. The physical spaces reflected this change. The house stayed mine, yes, but more significantly, the fundamental architecture of my life stayed unequivocally mine. Laura once bitterly remarked, near the end, that I was just the ground she stood on while she was chasing the sky. At the time, she meant it as an insult, a commentary on my perceived lack of ambition or excitement. But now, looking at the life I'd built, I realized that the ground was precisely what I wanted to be. Solid, stable, and completely unmoved. If this story of finding your footing and establishing boundaries resonated with you, please consider hitting the subscribe button, leaving a like, and sharing a comment below about what setting firm boundaries has meant in your own life. Your support, engagement, and shared vulnerability are what keep these stories coming. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.
My flat sings vipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note, a piece of me, forever here in harmony. My flood sings wipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note, a piece of me, forever here in harmony. Music lives inside my heart. Music lives inside my heart.